On the night she was to begin her life as queen, she instead vanished into legend. The palace was alive with celebration. Torches blazed along marble corridors, musicians filled the halls with triumphal song, and courtiers raised jewelled goblets to toast the union that promised to bind kingdoms together. That night, the princess, beloved, envied, and watched by all, stepped into her new life. Draped in silks that shimmered like moonlight and crowned with a wreath of roses, she seemed less a bride than a vision. The banquet was endless. Whole stags roasted in honey, mountains of sugared fruits, fountains of wine flowing into silver basins. Guests laughed, sang, and whispered, some praising her beauty, others speculating about the political price of her marriage. The groom beamed, though his smile never reached his eyes. Priests declared the union blessed. Outside, peasants lit bonfires, their cheers echoing across the countryside. All was spectacle, all was joy. But beneath the glitter of the feast, unease lingered. Some claimed the princess's hands trembled as she raised her goblet. Others noticed her glances, quick, anxious, toward the chamber doors. And when the music swelled, she seemed to vanish into herself, her expression pale beneath the candlelight. A bride draped in grandeur, yet carrying something heavier than jewels. As midnight neared, the procession to the bridal chamber began. Attendants guided her down hushed corridors lit by flickering torches. The chamber itself was prepared like a shrine, walls hung with embroidered tapestries, a bed draped in crimson silk, bowls of incense perfuming the air. Her ladies-in-waiting fussed over her gown, whispered blessings, then bowed low before leaving her to await her husband. The heavy doors closed, guards stood at their posts. Silence fell, and then the silence became too long. By dawn, whispers swept the palace. The groom awoke alone. The bed had not been slept in. The chamber was empty. The silks lay undisturbed, save for a single necklace glittering on the floor. The window shutters were locked. The doors are still barred from within. The princess was gone. Panic spread like fire. Guards stormed the halls, priests muttered of omens, nobles exchanged frantic glances. How could a princess vanish from a sealed room? Some swore they heard faint screams in the night. Others whispered she had been carried off by spirits or fled with a secret lover. One truth was undeniable. On the very night meant to secure her destiny, the princess disappeared without a trace. What followed would be weeks of terror, decades of rumour, and centuries of legend. This is the story of the princess who vanished on her wedding night, and the mystery that haunted a kingdom ever after. Long before her wedding night, before the feasts and silks and whispers of alliance, the princess's life began under a shadow. Chroniclers tell us that on the night of her birth, storms raged across the kingdom. Lightning split the sky, the cathedral bells tolled without hands to pull them, and in villages far from the palace, peasants claimed the earth itself groaned. To some, it was merely a coincidence. To others, it was an omen. The child born that night, they whispered, was marked by fate. She was the only daughter of a dynasty obsessed with heirs. Her father, the king, had long prayed for sons, warriors to defend his realm, princes to secure his bloodline. Instead, he received a daughter. Beautiful, yes. Intelligent, certainly. But in the ruthless arithmetic of a medieval rule, she was a pawn, not a prize. From her earliest breath, she was less a child than a tool. Her future measured not in years, but in alliances she might seal with her hand in marriage. Still, her presence was impossible to ignore. Servants marvelled at her pale skin, her hair like spun silver, her eyes the deep grey of storm clouds. Priests declared her beauty proof of divine favour, though others whispered that such perfection was unnatural, a mask hiding a curse. At her baptism, when the priest lowered her into the water, she did not cry. Witnesses later claimed she stared at him with unsettling calm, as if she knew what lay ahead. Her childhood was cloaked in contradiction. Tutors praised her sharp mind, noting how quickly she learned languages, how easily she mastered music and dance. Yet she seemed haunted, prone to silences that unsettled those around her. At night, her nurses reported her waking in terror, claiming she saw shadows at her window, figures watching her from the garden. The king dismissed it as childish fancy. but the palace staff whispered of spirits drawn to her, omens chasing the storm-born princess. By adolescence, she had become the jewel of the court. Foreign envoys praised her beauty, poets wrote verses comparing her to Venus or Diana. But admiration came with fear. Rumours spread that she carried ill luck wherever she went. When a tutor collapsed suddenly in her presence, people muttered that her touch was cursed. When a hunting party she accompanied returned bloodied from an accident, whispers blamed the princess, not chance. Each misfortune fed the growing legend that she was marked from birth, that joy could never cling to her for long. The queen, her mother, sought to protect her. She surrounded her with ladies-in-waiting, guarded her with prayers and relics, and insisted her daughter's destiny would be one of glory, not doom. But the queen's reassurances did little to silence the court. Every accident, every misstep, every rumour reinforced the idea that the princess was destined for tragedy. Even her beauty was twisted into a warning. The brighter the flame, one courtier muttered, the faster it burns. And the princess, herself? She carried the weight quietly. Those who knew her described her as kind yet distant, graceful yet melancholy. She laughed at feasts, but her eyes rarely matched her smile. When asked about marriage, she would fall silent, as if some part of her already knew that her wedding day would not be the beginning of life, but its unravelling. By the time she reached womanhood, the storm-born princess was less a person than a prophecy. To her people, she was hope and dread entwined. To her family, she was leverage. To her enemies, she was a weakness. And to herself, though history cannot record her private thoughts, perhaps she was already a ghost walking toward her fate. By the time the princess reached her 17th year, her life was no longer her own. In a palace ruled by politics and plagued by fragile alliances, her hand in marriage became the most valuable weapon in the king's arsenal. Suitors had come before, distant princes, ambitious dukes, even aging widowers with vast estates, but none had been chosen. For years, the question of her betrothal hovered over the court like a storm cloud waiting to break. When the decision finally came, it was not born of love, nor of her preference, but of necessity. The kingdom faced mounting threats, enemies at its borders, rivals at court, coffers drained by endless wars. An alliance was required, and the princess's beauty, youth, and bloodline made her the perfect bargaining chip. Her groom-to-be was no romantic knight, no handsome prince from legend. He was a man nearly twice her age, a foreign noble whose wealth and armies promised stability. His reputation was one of cold calculation, a leader respected more than loved. To the princess, he was a stranger. To the king, he was salvation. The betrothal was announced with grandeur. Bells rang in cathedrals, proclamations were nailed to market doors, and heralds shouted the union as if it were already a victory won. In taverns and villages, commoners gossiped. Some celebrated the hope of peace. Others muttered that binding the storm-born princess to a foreigner was tempting fate itself. In the palace, courtiers smiled in public but whispered in private. Many had noticed the princess's pallor, the way her eyes went downcast at the mention of her future husband. Preparations for the wedding consumed the kingdom. Seamstresses worked day and night to weave gowns of silver and crimson silk. Jewellers polished family heirlooms until they glittered like stars. Carpenters constructed a bridal carriage gilded in gold leaf. No expense was spared, for this was not simply a union of two people. It was a theatre for the entire world to witness. The grandeur was designed to silence doubts, to convince the people that destiny itself blessed this match. But beneath the splendour ran currents of unease. The groom's arrival at the palace was marked not by cheers but by strained courtesy. His manner was stern, his affection for the princess measured in rehearsed gestures and polite words. At feasts he smiled for the crowd but rarely looked at her. To him she was not a bride but a treaty, her body a signature to bind kingdoms together. And though she bowed and curtsied, those closest to her swore she flinched at his touch, her laughter brittle, her steps heavy. Even the church seemed wary. Priests spoke of divine blessing, but others muttered of omens. On the morning of the engagement, a relic in the cathedral cracked. On the eve of the wedding, a statue toppled in the cloister garden. Peasants whispered that the match was cursed, that the princess's fate had already been sealed long before her vows were spoken. Still, the wheels of politics could not be stopped. Guests poured into the capital from across the realm, filling inns and taverns, swelling the city with celebration. Streets were hung with banners, and marketplaces overflowed with feasts. The wedding was to be the spectacle of the century, a display of unity that would dazzle allies and silence enemies. And yet, those who looked closely could see the truth in the princess's eyes. Amid the jewels and silks, the music and laughter, her gaze betrayed sorrow. She was a bride draped in finery but walking into a cage. When she processed into the cathedral, veiled and radiant, courtiers whispered of her beauty, but some, braver than others, muttered that she looked more like a sacrifice than a queen. The stage was set, the alliance was sealed, and the storm-born princess stepped into her fate, knowing her wedding night would change everything, but not in the way her father had planned. The day of the wedding rose with fanfare and ceremony. Bells clanged from every cathedral tower, their iron voices echoing across the capital. Trumpets blared, streets overflowed with peasants cheering as the bridal procession wound its way through the city. The princess sat within a gilded carriage, her veil lowered, her expression hidden. To the crowds she was radiant, the embodiment of hope. To those seated beside her she was pale, silent, her hands trembling in her lap. The ceremony itself unfolded with calculated grandeur. The cathedral glittered with candlelight, incense curled upward like ghostly smoke, and choirs sang hymns meant to sanctify the union. When the vows were spoken, the groom's voice carried steady and strong. The princess's reply was softer, as though pulled from her lips by force rather than will. Yet the marriage was sealed. Cheers erupted from the gathered nobles, and priests declared the union blessed by heaven. What followed was excess. The banquet sprawled late into the night, an ocean of wine and roasted meats, music and laughter. Jugglers performed, poets recited verses comparing the princess to Diana, the groom to Mars. Courtiers whispered behind jeweled goblets, debating whether the match would secure peace or invite ruin. The king drank heavily, his pride swelling with each toast. But through it all, the princess remained distant. She smiled when eyes fell upon her, but when the crowd's gaze shifted away, her expression sagged into something heavy, almost haunted. As midnight neared, the time came for the bridal chamber. Tradition demanded it. Ladies in waiting escorted the princess down torchlit corridors, their footsteps muffled against thick carpets. The chamber was prepared like a shrine, walls hung with embroidered tapestries, a bed of crimson silks, bowls of incense perfuming the air with heavy sweetness. Candles flickered against golden mirrors, multiplying the chamber into a labyrinth of firelight. Her attendants disrobed her carefully, folding each layer of her gown as though handling sacred relics. They brushed her hair, whispered blessings, kissed her hands, yet those closest swore her eyes brimmed with fear. Some said she clutched a small cross hidden in her palm, others claimed she whispered prayers under her breath. When all was ready, they bowed and withdrew, leaving her alone in the silken chamber. The heavy doors closed with a hollow thud. Guards took their positions outside. Time passed. How much, no one could say. By dawn, unease spread. The groom emerged pale and furious, demanding answers. He had entered the chamber hours earlier, yet when he awoke, the bed beside him was untouched. The sheets lay perfectly smooth. The chamber was empty. Guards stormed in, overturning tapestries, searching wardrobes, and opening chests. They found nothing. The window shutters remained bolted from within. The doors had never been opened. The only trace of the princess was a necklace glittering on the floor near the bed. No blood, no struggle, only silence. Panic rippled through the palace. Nobles muttered that she had been stolen away. Priests declared it a sign of divine wrath. Some whispered darker rumours, that she had fled willingly, escaping into the night with a secret lover, or worse, that something unnatural had claimed her. But one truth was undeniable. The princess who had entered her bridal chamber in silk and roses was gone. No witness, no trail, no explanation, only an empty bed where a queen was meant to begin her reign. The wedding feast had ended not with consummation, but with disappearance, and what began as a celebration now curdled into legend. At first the whispers were hushed, cautious, as if speaking them too loudly might make them true. A servant returned pale from the bridal corridor, swearing the chamber was empty. A guard insisted the door had been locked from the inside all night. Within minutes, rumour became panic. Panic became chaos. The groom, humiliated, was the first to shout. His voice rang down the stone halls, demanding that the princess be found immediately. He accused her ladies-in-waiting of negligence, the guards of treachery, the servants of conspiracy. Some claimed he struck a servant across the face in his rage, others that he collapsed into trembling disbelief. What no one could deny was his fury, for the bride he had paraded before the world was gone, and with her, his honour. The king's reaction was worse. Roused from his wine-drenched sleep, he stormed into the chamber, eyes bloodshot, his robe half-fastened. He saw the smooth sheets, the untouched bed, the necklace glinting on the floor. For a moment he was silent, as though staring at an open grave. Then he bellowed, his roar echoing like thunder. "She has been taken!" At once the palace became a hive of frantic searching. Guards tore through the corridors, battering open doors, overturning furniture and dragging servants into torchlight for questioning. Dogs were loosed in the gardens, their howls carrying through the night. Messengers galloped into the countryside, waking peasants from their sleep to demand if anyone had seen the vanished princess. Priests muttered prayers as they walked the halls, sprinkling holy water against the possibility of spirits. Some whispered that the princess's birth omen had finally claimed her, that she had been taken by the same shadows she saw as a child. Others insisted it was the work of enemies, a rival kingdom stealing her away to shatter the alliance. The nobles, too, felt the chill of dread. They clustered in corners of the great hall, whispering beneath the roar of panic. Was it an assassination, a betrayal from within, or something darker still? Each faction blamed the other, pointing trembling fingers in the half-light. The air was thick with fear and accusation, as heavy as the incense still lingering from the wedding feast. Outside the palace walls, the rumours spread even faster. Peasants who had once cheered the wedding fires now whispered of screams carried by the wind, of ghostly shapes flitting across the battlements. Some swore they saw a pale figure at a window before dawn, only for it to vanish in an instant. Others claimed the river near the city ran red with roses that morning, a sign that the princess's soul had fled into the water. The groom demanded that the chamber be sealed, and no one was allowed to enter until the truth was found. But sealing the room did nothing to quell the terror. How could a woman vanish from a chamber locked from within? No window open, no door unbarred, no sign of struggle, only absence. It was as if she had dissolved into the air, leaving behind nothing but silence and suspicion. By sunrise, the palace had ceased to be a place of celebration. The garlands of roses hung wilted and brown, the feast tables reeked of spoiled wine, and the music had been replaced by the clang of armoured boots. Guests who had danced hours before now demanded to leave, muttering that they would not remain in a cursed place. But the gates were closed. No one would be permitted to depart until answers were found. In the shadows of the cathedral, priests huddled together. One declared it an omen. A kingdom that built its strength on politics and greed had now been punished. Another whispered of demonic bargains, of brides carried to hell in exchange for their family's power. Few dismissed these claims outright, for none could explain what they had seen. The king, trembling with rage and fear, swore that the princess would be found, that no stone, no servant, no secret would be left unturned. Yet in the hearts of all present, dread had already taken root. They knew the truth would not be simple, nor merciful. A princess had vanished into legend, and the kingdom had awakened into a nightmare. The investigation began before the sun had fully risen. By dawn, the palace was transformed into a fortress of suspicion. Guards sealed the gates. No one was allowed in or out. What hours before had been the stage of celebration was now a prison, its laughter replaced by torchlight and the sound of armoured boots striking marble floors. The bridal chamber was the first to be searched. Every tapestry was torn from the walls, every chest overturned, every plank of the floor examined. Servants whispered of hidden tunnels, so masons were called to test the walls with hammers. The echoes rang hollow in places, but no passage was found. The shutters were bolted, the door still barred from the inside. The chamber was a riddle locked within stone. Suspicion turned inward. The princess's ladies-in-waiting were dragged before the king, their gowns torn, their eyes wide with terror. They swore they had left her safely in the chamber, swore that no sound of struggle had reached their ears, but fear demanded a scapegoat. Torturers were summoned. In the dungeons beneath the palace, screams echoed as delicate fingers were crushed, as iron instruments sought confessions that did not exist. Still, nothing emerged but sobs and denials. Attention shifted to the guards. They had stood outside the chamber doors all night, hearing nothing but silence. The groom accused them of conspiracy, claiming they had been bribed to allow an abduction. They protested, insisting the door was never opened. When pressed, one guard broke down and claimed he had heard faint scratching at midnight, like fingernails against stone. But when he checked, the door was still sealed. The king dismissed it as delirium, but the rumour spread like wildfire. The princess had clawed her way into the walls. Foreign envoys fared no better. The groom's rivals present at the wedding were immediately suspected. Their chambers were ransacked, their servants interrogated, their belongings confiscated. One ambassador was accused of the witchcraft when a charm was found in his trunk, though it proved only to be a simple prayer scroll. Still, the incident nearly sparked war. Letters raced across borders, demanding answers, each kingdom accusing another of treachery. What began as a wedding had become a diplomatic powder keg. Priests too offered their theories. Some declared the princess had been taken by angels, removed from a sinful world. Others whispered darker tales, that the devil himself had claimed her as payment for her dynasty's sins. They pointed to her strange birth omens, her silences, her sudden vanishing as proof that she was never fully mortal. To the terrified courtiers, such explanations felt no less plausible than the impossible truth of an empty chamber. Even the common people were not spared the frenzy. Villagers near the palace were questioned, travellers on the roads stopped and searched, and peasants were accused of harbouring the vanished bride. In one village, an old woman was burned as a witch after claiming she had dreamt of the princess walking barefoot into the forest, crowned with thorns. Her screams joined the growing chorus of fear. Through it all, the king's rage consumed him. He demanded answers, demanded bodies, demanded confessions. Dozens were imprisoned, many executed, yet the mystery only deepened. The chamber remained a riddle, the princess a ghost. Each day without discovery sharpened the terror. Was she alive somewhere, imprisoned by enemies? Or had she been swallowed by forces beyond comprehension? The investigations yielded only fragments, rumours, whispers, shadows. And yet, each failure only fed the legend. The princess had not simply disappeared. She had been erased, leaving behind only questions that no blade, no torch, no prayer could ever answer. By the end of the second week, the palace was no closer to the truth, but the silence of her absence was louder than any confession. The princess had vanished on her wedding night, and the kingdom itself trembled in the void she left behind. As days turned to weeks, the palace could no longer withstand the weight of unanswered questions. The search had failed, the tortures had revealed nothing, the prayers had returned only silence. And so, the king made the choice that rulers across history have turned to in moments of crisis. If the truth could not be found, it would be buried. The first step was proclamation. Heralds were sent into the streets, their voices loud but hollow, as they declared the princess had fallen ill and passed peacefully in her sleep. To the peasants who had seen bonfires for her wedding only days before, the story rang false. Whispers rose immediately. How could a young bride, radiant in health, die without warning? But questions were dangerous, and silence was safer than truth. Within the palace, her chamber was sealed. Guards were posted at its door, and none were permitted to enter again. The necklace, once found glittering on the floor, was taken and hidden, its existence never spoken of in public. Portraits of the princess were quietly removed from the great halls, her likeness painted over in frescoes, her name omitted from prayers at Mass. It was as though she had never existed. For the groom, the humiliation was unbearable. He demanded her body be displayed, proof that she had truly died. The king refused. Instead, he insisted she had been buried swiftly in the royal crypt to preserve her dignity. No cortege marched through the city, no coffin was seen by the people. the crypt remained sealed. Rumours swirled that there was no body within, that the tomb was filled only with stones. Among the nobility, fear and shame silenced the scandal. Courtiers were ordered under threat of death to speak of the wedding night only as a tragedy of illness. Chroniclers were commanded to rewrite their accounts, carefully omitting the mystery. Yet even as ink dried on the official lies, folk songs began to bloom among the peasants. They sang of a bride stolen by ghosts, of a queen carried away by demons, of a princess who slipped between worlds on the night she was to be crowned. What the court sought to erase, the people kept alive. The queen, her mother, is said to have wept endlessly. Some claim she visited the sealed chamber in secret, leaving flowers by its barred doors. Others whispered she went mad with grief, convinced her daughter still lived, calling her name in empty corridors. The king, cold and unyielding, refused to acknowledge her sorrow. To him, the scandal was not grief, but weakness, an imperfection that could topple a dynasty. Foreign courts watched with sharpened interest. Envoys carried news of the disappearance across borders, mocking the kingdom's silence. If the princess had been stolen, it was proof of incompetence. If she had fled, it was proof of shame. If she had simply vanished, it would have been proof that the dynasty itself was cursed. No proclamation could erase the whispers echoing in foreign palaces. In time, the cover-up became its own prison. The more the crown insisted upon its story, the less it was believed. Priests continued to murmur of divine judgment. Peasants sang of her ghostly return. Courtiers trembled in the shadows of their own silence. The erasure only made the absence heavier. And so, the princess was buried twice, once in the sealed crypt where no body may have rested, and once in the silence forced upon those who had known her. Official history forgot her name. The people remembered. The cover-up achieved its purpose. The kingdom survived, the throne remained occupied, the alliance, though weakened, did not shatter entirely. But the cost was a wound that never healed. The mystery lingered, festering in the minds of all who had seen that wedding night. A princess had vanished, and though her father tried to bury her memory, her absence grew louder with every year. Time did not erase the princess. It transformed her. What the court tried to smother in silence, the people resurrected in legend. Within a generation, her story no longer belonged to kings and chroniclers. It belonged to whispers in taverns, to ballads sung by wandering minstrels, to the fearful hush of mothers warning their daughters on the eve of marriage. The first tales were simple: a bride who vanished from her chamber, a mystery that no guard could solve. But as decades passed, the story darkened. Some claimed she had been stolen by her groom's enemies, dragged screaming through hidden tunnels. Others swore she had fled with a secret lover, her silken gown trailing behind her as she vanished into the forest. And then came the darker versions, that she had been taken by spirits, her cursed birth fulfilled, her soul claimed by demons on the night she was to become queen. Peasants told of hearing her cries in the wind on stormy nights, her voice calling from the palace towers. Fishermen claimed to see her pale figure walking the riverbank at dawn, her wedding veil dripping with water. In villages, young brides carried charms to ward off their fate, fearful that the same curse might steal them from their beds. The palace, too, gained a reputation. Servants muttered that the bridal chamber was haunted, that candles sputtered and died when the door was opened, that jewels left inside vanished by morning. Guards swore they heard footsteps in the sealed room, or saw a white figure drifting through corridors where no one should walk. Some refused to stand watch near the chamber, claiming they felt icy hands brush their shoulders in the dark. Historians, centuries later, tried to untangle truth from legend. Some argued she had been assassinated, her death disguised to preserve the alliance. Others suggested political abduction, a rival kingdom stealing her away to sabotage the marriage. A few more daring scholars whispered of suicide, that the princess had chosen death over a loveless union, her body hidden to protect the crown's honour. Yet no theory has ever found proof. The locked chamber, the vanished body, the silence of the royal record, all remained unsolved, and so her tale endured because it could not be answered. The mystery itself became her legacy. In paintings she appeared as a ghostly bride, pale and sorrowful. In poetry she was the eternal maiden, a symbol of innocence betrayed. In folklore, she was a warning that power built on lies would always be punished, that women bound by politics could never escape fate. Even today, in the ruins of the old palace, visitors claim strange happenings. Guides speak of doors that refuse to open, of veils seen fluttering in rooms where no wind blows, of faint sobbing echoing through stone halls at midnight. Locals still call her the Eternal Bride, the princess who never left her wedding night. Her name may have been erased from chronicles, but her absence became louder than her presence ever was. Where kings and generals are remembered for their deeds, she is remembered for her disappearance. A life that should have been bound to politics instead became bound to legend. And in that way, she achieved a kind of immortality her dynasty could never have imagined. The haunting legacy of the vanished princess is not just a story of loss, it is a mirror. It reflects the cruelty of politics, the fragility of power, and the way ordinary people transform tragedy into myth. She disappeared from her chamber, but she never disappeared from memory. Centuries have passed since the night the princess vanished, yet her story endures like a wound that refuses to heal. Histories of kings and wars fade into dust, but her absence remains sharper than any blade, heavier than any crown. She was meant to be a bride, a queen, a mother of heirs. Instead, she became a shadow, a name whispered only in ballads and ghost stories. What truly happened in that chamber? No chronicler could answer. Perhaps she was murdered to hide a scandal, her body sealed away where no eyes would ever find it. Perhaps she was stolen by rivals, her life spent in silence far from the palace she once called home. Perhaps, as the peasants believed, her cursed birth had marked her for something no human hand could prevent. But in the end, truth matters less than memory. The vanished princess became more than herself. She became a symbol. For some, she is tragedy incarnate, a warning of how power devours the innocent. For others, she is defiance, a woman who refused the role written for her, even if it meant vanishing into nothing. And for those who still wander the ruins where she once walked, she is a presence felt in flickering candlelight, in doors that creak without cause, in whispers that stir when the wind rises. The court tried to erase her, the chronicles tried to silence her, but legend is stronger than ink, and absence is louder than truth. To this day, she's remembered not by her name, but by her fate, the princess who disappeared on her wedding night. In every retelling, she's still there, veiled, pale, standing at the threshold of her chamber, waiting for a dawn that never comes, the eternal bride.